Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Humans Are Hyper-Immune, written by Edge Anonymous. The researcher watched the ship come down from the red sky. First, it looked like a star, then a missile, and once she felt the heat of engines, she saw it put itself upon the earth as some sort of beast. From the dark bowels 10 soldiers came, intimidating figures, all dressed in proud Talassian colors. They stood on the scarred ground with long black lances, and with them they began to burn away what little grew there. The flames went up sizzling, feasting on small grey weeds and a thin pale fungi that clung to the rock, and the smoke hung still in the black column against the blood-red sky. Then the 11th. He came blinking out of that darkness, and the red sun found him, and he squinted against it as they purged his trail with fire. Each step he took, new flames erupted, and foliage died, and to the researcher it sounded like the breath of an immense ancient serpent slithering towards her. It was of utmost importance that the 11th never touch a living thing. The figure stepped across the threshold. The oil-reeking air was thick enough to chew, and by this point she was very afraid indeed. It was not every day you received a human liaison. The soldiers scurried off like dark insects to their own decontamination. As soon as they were gone, their ship with them. She stood in her suit, watching him scale the incline. The gel of her harness set heavy against her. She feared no flame or beast, but what was to follow gave even a seasoned researcher pause. That thing they did when they met one another new. She'd seen them do it in her orientation. The human custom of shaking hands was a dangerous and reckless thing. "Hi," and there it was. She looked at his outstretched hand for a moment. Whole empires fell through such practices. It made her vascular system twist, but she was a brave scientist, and against her suit's better judgment, took hold of the appendage. You can let go now." Sorry." She retracted her suit's hand, offering a sheepish smile. He thankfully didn't find it offensive. "No sweat. I'm a biologist, not a diplomat." They walked the perimeter together. The thin white mesh of translucent wire stood between them and their planet, and through it she could see the Talassi in its finer parts. She could see the tall cluster of silver bubbles, delicate as if plucked mid-formation, rising from an ocean of the city. That was the Xenology Institute. Countless muted-grey gel suits like hers moved from bubble to bubble, looking very beautiful, clad in fading rays of the red sun. They walked in courts, and the human spied things to his liking as well, perhaps already making notes on the new additions to the skyline. The very human-like additions. To their left, the deep monitoring array reached skywards, skeletal fingers of some buried giant, each metallic digit humming with a frequency at the edge of her hearing. The orbital denial batteries stood as silent sentinel beyond them, with their surfaces etched in flowing patterns. The ships told the story of Melia 4. An uneasy image, rendered in steel and composite. The first human liaison, focused on engineering, had come up with a design for the gun. He apparently had it lying around. The Talassians merely supplied the mural, which the humans politely considered equivalent. It was to mask the overwhelming helplessness of their culture, of course, but Talassian attitudes were quickly shifting underneath. Their human-derived ships, produced by human-made machines, were all drilling in human at this point. And for many, that was a cause for relief instead of alarm. The researchers were still dismissing the gel suit's warnings about the ongoing contamination in the human's wake. "A little greenery wouldn't hurt." The human made a disapproving sort of noise. "No offense to you, but you should have asked for a city planner. A park would work wonders here." He gestured to the deliberately empty patch of quarantined space where the minefield was buried. He did not know this, of course. She held her breath in her gills, unsure how to tell him they didn't have anything suitable to put in a human-style park, that the notion was from another world, like the human himself. Stranger yet, that was partly why he was here. They could have designed mega-range artillery on their own. What they couldn't fathom was the things you put in parks, or the exceedingly complex mammals she fell into step with. Yes, it was true. In matters of biology, they were lost. She became quite invested, explaining what they had instead of parks. Strains of glowing fungi, the odd colony of moss that kind of looked like trees, and he took it in with an idle ha and cools. She might have gone on monologuing proudly for quite some time, had her attention not been caught by a thing. A little synthetic tubule. It slipped from his jacket, falling onto the white quartz walkway. A small thing, nothing at all, really. He discreetly swept it up into his palm, but she saw it happen quite clearly. What's that? She asked, confusion mixing into the smile. Oh, this! He had a boyish sort of smirk. He shook the plastic and the little bubble tumbles inside. She smiled back at her. Malaria. She blinked. They had asked for samples to be exchanged, but she didn't know what a malaria was, and it didn't sound particularly friendly. It's not a pathogen, is it? Well, how dangerous would it be if, it depends. And you carry it. Her voice was as thin and as a thread. In your pocket. Yeah? Her gel suit politely informed her the warhead beneath their feet would be self-arming itself shortly. I, see. Did you, read the... She rummaged through her carry-at-all-times documents. The suit was asking for confirmation codes, a flashing red in the corner of her eye. No, bad. Shoo, stop it. Did you read this? The orientation? Huh? He stared at the neatly marked 392 pages of basic Thalassian biosafety protocol. Well, yes, but they didn't have it in English during the briefing, so I just, He pocketed the malaria. You know, we really should get to work. He was already walking away. The researcher was still hammering away at her wrist controls. Stop. Abort, stop. The human peered over his shoulder, almost at the airlock. Unless you'd rather stand there while I catch a cold out here. A cold? She didn't know about malaria, but she knew about what a cold was. A cold? Sea gods, no. The diplomatic fallout alone, the human expiring in agony mere hours after planetfall, his lungs filling with fluid while their finest physician stood helpless. She couldn't even finish the thought. She hurried after him, the documents still clutched to her chest, her suit's warnings pulsing a steady, reproachful rhythm against her skin, following that human outline of contamination. This is my workstation. I'm sure you will not find anything lack. She couldn't finish the sentence before his fingers had already started probing things on and around the desk. The spectrometer, the neat. That's, be careful, that's, I know, I think I got it. He was already jamming sample after sample into the analyzer's feed port. How did you? The human had so many samples with him that they were piled onto the workspace, and yet he still had some polyethylene tubes stuck in his uniform's jacket, threatening to spill contamination over the floor. How to get those past the busy eyes of the Thalassian officials was beyond her. Well, at least he wore gloves. What's all this? You asked for cultures. We got them here for you. Well, let's see what we have. His fingers traced over the vast heap of plastic while the machine worked. Measles, mumps, he pulled up his nose, cramming another Eppendorf vial into the machinery designed not to be touched at all. Something else, a marker rubbed off, but, that works. He held up a particularly vicious sample, the contents swirling with a sickly yellow hue. This future came from a swamp in Florida. Nobody could identify it, so congratulations, it's, your problem now. He surmised with a smile and a shrug. Her fins jittered with anxiety. You cannot just... These require cataloguing and proper intake procedure, and there are forms that need to be completed before any foreign biological material enters into the analyzer system. She snatched the Floridon sample from his hand and held it up to the light. And this one does not even have a label, so how am I supposed to document the origin or its potential risk classification? It's, from a swamp. That's not a classification. This proved exceedingly frustrating, but to think this was a mere fraction of their biosphere. It was inconceivable. She could just sit there for hours and watch the data pour in. She'd have to dig up whole libraries of dozens, more than hundreds of worlds to get something as colourful and diverse as... The analyzer beeped, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Sana? She glanced over at him, following his gaze to the error message on the screen. Oh, it says... He cut her off. I can read your language. I know what it says. Then what's the problem? She asked innocently enough. Her suit-covered fin was about to reslot the sample when he stopped her. He was thinking. You said that I was the first human microbiologist in Thalassia, correct? Yes, that's correct. And you have no copies of our records? No. She read the error message again and still couldn't understand why he was looking at it like that. Overwrite existing data. Did you? He rolled his chair back from the table, where the pipetting arm was carrying on its duty obliviously. He folded his hands in his lap, regarding them with a conflicted expression. Sana! The realization crept up on her, rising like ice spreading up under her gel suit. I'm sorry, terribly sorry. I hadn't known that you didn't know that you'd been attacked by them as well. Oh, see gods below. I should have reread the briefing more carefully. I'm sorry. Sana, his voice was calm, quite calm, in a way that didn't make sense to her. Yes? Could you, explain to me how the bubonic plague got here? The lab complex in Thalassia had a garden, and that garden had a tree. Since he wanted to see something of a park, she thought he might like their closest approximation. It had the prettiest and most formidable tree in all of Thalassia, almost a complex tall, ensnared by chemotrophic vines and crisscross of green and blue. Underneath their foliage, the young and bored classes gathered every semi-cycle to listen to rattly professors wax on and on about the tree, how it was an embodiment of the grace and beauty of biology, and so on and so forth. And the human looked upon this very tree, hands buried in his skinny jacket, and probably asked himself, "What's wrong with this tree?" Yes, the thing she went out of her way to see every day, even when it was raining. To him, the sight would be surmised in a single word: garbage. It looked like spindly, lumpy garbage wrapped in garbage. She snorted. It was funny. She couldn't even feel insulted. She had seen Earth. She had seen rainforests, the reefs, the teeming life abound. Through pictures, yes, but every biosphere she'd gazed upon with her own eyes was now ruined, completely inadequate compared to a few grainy pictures of a world light years apart. The human shifted his weight beside her, his boots scraping against the stone path. He was still staring at the tree, and she could see him trying to find something polite to say. It's got character. She let out a slow breath through her gills. You don't have to lie to me. I've seen the pictures of your redwoods, your sequoias. This, she gestured vaguely at the knotted trunk, the sickly bioluminescent patches where fungal colonies had burrowed deep. This is what happens when you spend 3 centuries sterilizing everything that might harbor a pathogen. Her grip tightened on the vial. 3 decades of correspondence with dead ends and false trails, of intercepted transmissions and second-hand data fragments smuggled through neutral trading posts, all leading to this, to him, the vial. In that vial were pieces of that enormous Earth-shaped puzzle, acquired through decades. Those pieces had been scarce during wars and system-spanning pandemics. Colleagues called that thing, derogatory, an obsession, and she'd accepted that opinion with a shrug and a smile without quite agreeing with it. Because obsession implied irrationality, and there was nothing irrational about hunting for the objectively most anomalous and wonderful biosphere in the known galaxy. It was a myth, a world where life overflowed and was bountiful under every idle rock, where all permutations of biology had been fathomed already, beautiful and boundless. These stories sounded like superstitious babble. Truly, no such paradise could exist by itself, much less without their influence tainting it. But it was the hope of salvation that kept Sana searching. Earth seemed, she held on to that childlike hope, like a match. And here she stood now, vindicated. The proof of Earth, the proof of myth stood next to her now, glancing curiously at the paper in her fin. The proof had the form of a risen ape, tangible, dangerous, and really the son of its cruel mother. To think that this biosphere wasn't entirely knowledgeable about itself came as a surprise even to the self-acclaimed Earth expert. The human watched her rearrange and shuffle the pages upon pages as they stood in the arboretum. He swirled something that steamed and smelled like something charred, which she'd been informed was normal and desirable. A miracle he was allowed to keep this. He looked at her face and then at the oil swirls in his mug again. So? How do you even start this conversation? Sana settled on the most obvious. I suppose you should know, from what we have seen thus far, Earth isn't like the rest. The rest? What other worlds? Yes. Other biospheres in our galaxy. This world, for instance. She cast a gaze around. Primitive plants, fungi, some creatures you'd hesitate to call vertebra, much less intelligent. Things that you'd find underneath the rocks in Antarctica. On Thalassia, life was only possible on the fringes in little pockets around geothermal vents. Oxygenation was recent, evolution was slow, careful, very frugal, often fragile. She removed the picture of a similar worlds from the little clip, handed it over to him to view. Pictures of the would-be Earths, for less fortunate scientists than her to study. the twinkling deep blue of Thalassia, the dreary calm rocky grey of Milia 4. But nothing compared to the aggressively alive blue marble. She would have called it a green marble because it was actually a defining feature from the rest, but apparently they were set on their name. Picture a spectrum. We, that is, Thalassia, as well as our fellow republics. She tapped the photos. We're all ranging somewhere on the rim of the primitive, just slightly veering into complex. By chance, rudimentary brains developed. Then, with a bit of luck, civilizations. Then, you have Earth. She pulled out a final photograph, creased and worn from years of handling. The blue-green marble, which is not on the spectrum at all. Earth is an anomaly, a statistical outlier, an impossibility. His brows creased as he stared deeper into his mug. I find that hard to believe. I don't feel especially rare. I understand the confusion. Please read. His eyes wandered over to the papers she shuffled. He skimmed the words, then took a half-dozen pages, then read again with rapt attention. His lips, eyes formed a question before he could speak it properly. We're what? Hyperimmune. His eyes said, huh. It's a relative term. She took the paper, speaking again. What happens when a world becomes more suitable for life? More life develops. Yes. Up to a point. He looked up. That point being? The point where your Earth's hyperabundance leads to hyperparasitism. She flicked through the files, full of reports of viruses, bacteria, biological strains, things Earth was rich in. Deadly. Deadly, all of them. Optimizing a single cell is vastly easier than a trillion cells. A sufficiently evolved bacterium, an oversaturation with viruses, and collapse surely follows. It has everywhere. Complex life and abundance is an outlier. Frugality, chance, dumb luck, that is the norm. The man set his mug down on the stone railing. The ceramic clinked against ancient rock, and it wafted there. A storm was rolling in, yet far in the distance. So, you're saying, everywhere else life stays simple because... Because complexity is expensive. Sana's suit pulsed with dim blue. And parasites are cheap. The moment a world produces something worth exploiting, something does. Fungi, viruses, bacteria, prions. The arms race ends quickly. The simple organisms win. They always win. They always have. Except on Earth? Except on Earth. She tamped the worn photograph. He was nervous beneath the surface, cogitating while scanning the horizon. Yes. Instead, you got mammals and forests and coral reefs and 10 million species all trying to eat each other simultaneously. And somehow, none of them won. She paused. And then one of them did, in a different sort of way. That one's talking to me right now. His hands vanished into his jacket pocket. Excuse the question, but how did you miss such a possibility? Didn't you ever try to simulate such a scenario? She shook her head. Planetary computing is hard. It's even harder to simulate something that you didn't even think was possible. Besides, how is your theory of everything coming along? He bit his lip. It's going. Besides, about my initial question. He stood up straighter, and the now easily apparent omnivorous build, the muscles a restrained strength, gave Sana pause. He looked to the darkening sky, perhaps spying for his Earth. Why does Thalassia have samples of the bubonic plague? You said I'm the first human here to tell you about, well, us. Then how'd you have that? The considerable mass of algae paper weighed heavy in her fin. She peeled out a sheet from the conglomerate. Bubonic plague, yes, it's MACV-R049. It was used on us approximately 210 years ago. We don't know exactly. The records were lost. On us? She gave a bitter laugh at his remark. Oh, you thought I was about to say, by us. No, we would never. She shook her head, and the forced smile runs away from her face. It was used on us. What you call a bubonic plague, smallpox, influenza, we call MACV, the multiple adapted contagion vector. He had a hard time comprehending. Used by whom? Here comes the part that she was dreading. How do I even start telling you about them? He made a frustrated noise, pacing about the small gravel path. Please just say anything, she thought again. They are the Runius. They catalog biospheres. They traverse the cosmos in golden ships. They exterminate emergent sentient species. His features hardened. The warlike primate recognized his trade. And you've been fighting them, then? You're at war. Well, if you want to call it a war. Civilizations at that scale likely don't think of it that way. What scale? She searched for a human way of putting it. Do you think you're at war with the grass when you're mowing the lawn? The human stopped pacing. The storm was closer now, the distant clouds having crawled halfway across the blood-red sky. That's, he rubbed his face with both hands, that's a hell of a thing to say. It's a hell of a thing to be true. Biological weapons. Why? The Runius are old and dying. We think they're dying now, very, very slowly. They must have been dying for far longer than Talasia has been alive. The numbers are thin, but their force overwhelming. They compensate numbers with their pathogen, their microscopic legions. They have for centuries, millennia. It was hard for the human to grasp this, judging from his face. It might seem laughable to you, but we have no vaccines like you have, no antidotes. There are no adaptive immune response with a weakened condition in ourselves. We never evolved such a thing. We couldn't. So, what do you do instead? She looked to the sky. We die. The human stood very still. The wind tugged at his jacket, pulling those hidden pockets with their dangerous contents. Her grip tightened on the papers. Well, that's not what scares me. I've lived with this all my life. She gives a bitter, broken sort of smile. Right now, I don't even know what it is specifically. What scares me more about you? Her voice dropped. Either your biosphere is so deadly, so completely insane, that it churns out galaxy-ready bioweapons as a side project. Or the Runius tried to wipe you out just like they did with us. She inhaled a shaky breath with her gills. They tried to wipe you out, and you just didn't die. They threw everything they had at you, and you just kept shrugging it off, kept absorbing the blows like iron being forged. And when their weapons were dry, they just ran away. He shook his head slowly, then more vigorously. No! He observed the blinking lights and the artillery emplacement. I don't believe you. It was not every day that you heard of a multi-galactic genocider prancing around in your cosmic backyard, especially not the one that had by this point wiped out untold peoples, that shattered empires and memories of empires, only to show up at your door in the same stride. The genocider that had come to your door to kill you, that has killed so many before, and now, for seemingly no reason at all, fails. They were silent for a long time together. She flipped back to the start, freed the little picture that hurt to look at. She walked over to place it in his hand. This is Milia 4. He looked upon the muted colours and accepted the little frame. The lowering sun shined over the glossy print, and he turned it underneath. It's pretty, she nodded. It was destroyed when I was 17 years old. He stopped turning the picture. The Runius, she nodded. We called it the days of gold and silver. She could retell her diary from memory, and that is what she did. And the skies of Melia 4 looked beautiful as my planet lay dying. The Runius came in their gilded pearl-white ships, kin to my fading world in its dying. They came like they had 1,000 times before, and would 1,000 times again. The ships came down out of the sky, and the sky was white with them, and my world below was white with the light of them. The Runius sowed pox and rot into the earth with dispassion, like that of a tired farmhand scattering seeds onto an open field. The hand does not hate the furrow, nor does it love the seed. It just casts and moves on. But they did not move on unmoved. I had learned. Melia 4 was different from the others. When the red sun would sit bloodshot in my window, and the hour was quiet, I read what the Runius had written. I read their plays, their operas, music. The Runius had come to regard Melia 4 as a special place of honor. They had regarded the culling of it as a pearl amongst the worthy deeds. Entire arais were written about the world I was from, and they had killed, all rich with adoration, that beautiful Malay, stubborn Malay, with its hardened steel burrowed deep into its rock that was just not soft and unyielding things. It had merited the kinetic weapons to annihilate. It had required a personal touch, they had written, a touch beyond the thoughtless chore. They wrote of it in its totality, what they had heard and seen, the meek cries for treaty, for surrender, the simple begging of the dying. The Runius had listened, cruel and unsympathetic. They had listened with the care of an old librarian in love with his work. The way a child might find and hold a shiny thing to the sun and turn it slowly. The cries came up from the world below, and the Runius gathered them and held them. And when they were done listening, when they felt they had heard enough, they bore into the world with their missiles. Golden and chrome they descended, like the fingers of an indifferent god pressing down. Down and through the rock, through the steel, and everything else. Pressing down until the crust leaked red into the sky, and my world came apart. A privilege, the Runius would end up calling it. A worth. The Runius had written fondly of Melia. I know this to be truthful because I saw it. I watched it happen from the evacuation barge that spun away from the glittering gold and crimson fire in the void. It looked as though observing a cell's orderly apoptosis. I watched my world burst, spreading the rot of its death, the hopelessness and grief throughout the stars and into the hearts of each that bore witness. Melia's skies were beautiful. I remember that with perfect clarity. Had my mind been sharper then, had I not been a snot-nosed pup pressed against the glass in a barge filled with fear and ugly crying, I would have seen the inefficiency, the redundancy. Why poison a world, only to tear it apart? Why order a dying cell to die? Now, a well-marked soul, with the regret and the grief and the bad decisions up their gills, I understand. The Runius had seemed so enigmatic, nigh unknowable in their cruelty in my younger years. But the truth was perhaps far, far simpler, as it often is. What did it bring? Despair. And despair could spread. Despair could jump species, cross vacuum and poison forever. It could find its way into hearts that had never seen million skies, that never stood and smelled the brine of the beaches under a warm sun, that never loved anything at all that hadn't yet been lost to the gilded silver hands. It went where it would, and it entered where it would, and it would not ask, and it would not be refused. There was no facility dug deep enough, no bunker sealed tight enough to keep it from leaching in. There would never be. I cannot wrap my thoughts in a gel suit. Irrational to assume, but I knew it even then that the Runius wanted me personally to play witness, that they wanted me to carry this, a weapon aimed with patient care, penned in gold and silver, delivered across dark and years, to find me wherever I would flee. And I fled, and it had found me, for it had always been waiting for me. A Runian thought. Attached is a poorly cut out excerpt from the 25th recovered Runian opera suite, unknown opus, line 42, delivered by Gersum upon entry with the 53rd fellow courtiers. Let it be known, Melia's skies were beautiful on fire. And carrying that infection, I'd sometimes hear someone speak in Melia 4 yet, perhaps during another rationing announcement, another curfew, and the eulogy of another state funeral for an entire species, whispered across the perimeter now from concrete lips painted with bioluminescent fungi. The soft and pulling of the light. To me, to all Melians, Melia did not mean home anymore. Melia meant death. And she told him all of this, or most of this, and by this point she thought how horribly undignified it was of a diplomat to cry. At least the gel suit muffled those pathetic sobs to nothing. The wind picked up. The first cold drops of rain struck the stone paths between them, darkening the courts in scattered polka dots. The tree above them could offer no shelter, its gnarled branches too sparse, too sickly to catch more than a fraction of the downpour that was coming. Then his hand came out of his pocket. Slowly, it hovered there in the space between them, uncertain and awkward, before settling on his shoulder. The gel suit registered the contact, the pressure of 5 human fingers through the translucent layer. I'm sorry. 2 words, inadequate and small. Though sometimes they're all you have. She let them take the file from her, and he went inside to get an umbrella. And she stood in the rain, as the photography was bleeding green and blue onto the courts. She was still standing there when he returned. The umbrella was black and utilitarian, the kind issued from some emergency supply closet, if there were such things as emergency umbrellas. He held it over her first, tilting it so that the rain ran off the edge and onto the stone beside her feet. The gel suit was waterproof by design, of course. The umbrella was for her, not the suit. You didn't have to come back out. Her voice was hoarse. The suit's external speaker crackled slightly with the moisture. Actually, I did have to. A page is half crumpled and the rain stained in his hand. About your MacV's, number, 13. Yes, that one. The black blotches of the void, she sniffed. What of it? We called that thing smallpox. The past tense was not lost on her. He smirked, and it was not without a dash of pride. And it felt good to see what a smile looked like again. He looked exactly as he did when he dropped the vial of malaria, a little twinkle in his eyes. It killed hundreds of millions back when our numbers were in the hundreds of millions. 1/3 of all who had ever been blind were blind due to smallpox. So, what happened to it? We had enough of it. We put our foot down. We did what we did our best at. Sana thought, blinking, and almost laughed. You went to war with it, she gave dryly. The human nodded and sighed. I'm a standard-issue field biologist. I could be any one of the worse or better talents that came up here. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm not a real representative. I'm certainly not ambassador material. I really shouldn't be the one to speak to you on humanity's behalf. But I can speak as someone who loves his home, as a human from Earth. Sana listened under his umbrella. When we finally figured out what was happening, what had been happening for centuries, maybe millennia, there was a resolution, a vote, and we did it. The umbrella felt like a shield, a sword. We can wage war on anything, on everyone. Why not? There's a tiny, minuscule thing, and it's been killing us, blinding us, weakening us for longer than we can even properly account for. The vaccine we invented specifically for it, to kill it. And we came around to it eventually. The human nods again, more to himself than anything. We came around. He rolled over a flint with his soldier boots. We were waiting for it in every city, every village, in every country. On every street corner, we waited for it, and we caught it, and killed it, took it apart, and learned from it, and its brethren's infinite corpses. And what we learned since then. Pandemics are an annoyance now. Emergent viruses a joke. Every human child carries the immune equivalent of a nuclear arsenal in their blood, made smart by the ground-up carcasses of failed pathogens, things that failed pathetically to kill us. There's hardly something now that my cells could encounter that wouldn't be met by my, hello, I know you and I can kill you. He stared at his polished, mud-caked boots. In the setting red light, they looked bloodied. Smallpox. It used to mean something terrible. Now it's something to scare little children. Now it means nothing because it is nothing, because we made it so. We did that 24 years after we figured out what DNA looked like. The rain had soaked his hair, flattened his jacket, and yet he seemed indifferent to it, a creature built to persist through discomfort. The red sun caught the edges of his silhouette, made him look almost like something from a Renian masterpiece, impossibly iron and strong, something glittering and golden. The photograph of Melia 4 was a bleeding ruin in his hand. He hadn't let go of it, and she extended her gel suit-covered fin to gently pry the photograph from his grasp. The ink was ruined, the image little more than a ghost of blues and greys, a spectre of a world that wasn't there anymore. You're very strange, do you know that? All of you. It's come up. She held the ruined photograph to her chest, her suit's jaw rippling slightly at the contact. The rain hammered against the umbrella and ran in rivers the edges. 24 years was nothing. No time at all. The whole history was no time at all. Her breath to her, nothing to the Ruinians. She seemed mournful still, eyeing that picture, regarding a world, a dying people. Was it a human trait? To be able to mourn those that he didn't even know. Yet the umbrella was steady in his grip, absolutely steady. The wind howled around them, and the damn tree was groaning. But his hand, the hand holding the cheap black umbrella over her head, did not tremble. His expression was moved, but he was holding on to the umbrella while he tried to look like a soldier, like some ape with a stick and a bone. I'm sorry. It was the same 2 words again. I wish we'd been faster. It rained, and the rain drummed against the umbrella. I suppose what I'm trying to say is this. Melia, if it had been a human world, if it had been Earth, we would mourn, of course. We'd honor the dead. But following that, he weighed what he had to say very carefully. We would be very, very angry. Sana stared at him. That's your response? Her voice came out more accusatory than she intended. To a 12,000-year-old genocide, your response is that you'd be angry. I'd be furious, he corrected. I'd be so angry, I'd find a way to make it their problem. No one had ever offered to be angry on their behalf, and she didn't know what to do with that. The Talassian Republic had responded to Melia 4 with memorials, the thing across the perimeter, with solemn ceremonies and state funerals and carefully worded condemnations transmitted on channels that Runius never listened to anyway. They had built the bunkers and the deep monitoring arrays, and they were huddled behind their perimeter fencing and waited to die with dignity, with about as much dignity as one has when bleeding from every orifice. You can't fight them, she said, the old refrain, the mantra of every briefing, every strategic assessment, every survival protocol she memorized since she was 17 years old, and watching her world come apart through a viewport. You can't fight them. You can only hide. You can only run. You can only... I know. His voice was quiet, laced with borrowed anger. I know you can't. You can't. He fished around in his jacket. But we're not you. He held up a plastic vial, retrieved from his pocket, a murky-coloured fluid. It's the malaria. I carry this as a trinket, a trophy, to remind myself. The bubbles inside tumble as he shakes it. It's an old foe, a broken one, just like all the others will be someday. Even if I have to personally do it, that's diplomacy. From me to you. And Sana understood what anger meant, and what good deeds it could accomplish. The words of his were like a vaccine in itself. This feeling. She felt a little silly recognizing it, and the smile bloomed on her face. It's just been so long. And that feeling's been so distant. A dream, or mirage, or lost altogether. But it was with her now, and that warmth was spreading throughout her chest, foreign and beautiful. It's called hope, Sana. A little antidote straight to the heart. And despair was washed away, fleeting like the rain. He let the silence be, and his face was something else now, adorned with a sort of grinning primal madness. Same face that looked at a predator wearing the skin of a cub, picked up one of the many bones on the savannah and bashed its skull in. She saw in his face of their salvation. It was glorious. It was righteous. Terrifying. It was the moment she'd been waiting for. So she asked the question she'd hoped all her life to ask. Can you be our galactic immune system? There were things, unspoken things going through his mind. Some lesser instinct or hesitation. But the man came out stronger. He responded, carrying in his voice all of man's hatred of disease. Yes! He didn't blink or flinch or look away. The ape, standing in the rain with his stolen diseases and his borrowed umbrella on a foreign world, had absolutely no doubt in his mind. I think we can manage that. The red sun was setting at last. The storm was rolling past. The rain eased into a drizzle, then a mist, and a bioluminescent fungi on the sickly tree were beginning to glow in the gathering dark. The man followed her gaze to the tree. We'll start with that if you want. Horticulture's not my specialty. But I know a guy. She laughed. It surprised her, a real laugh, not the bitter excuses she'd offered him before. You know a guy? I know several guys. We're a species of guys who know guys. He folded her umbrella with a practiced snap. It's sort of our thing. I'm going to need more lab space, she said quietly, and probably more assistants and a bigger analyzer, and... His umbrella poked against her armored shoulder. The suit didn't like that. You're going to need a lot of things, he smiled, and the same boyish, reckless grin. Oh, we've got time. Contamination alert! Contamination alert! Shut it! Bad suit! Bad! The red sun gave its last long and slanting beams that turned to wet quartz into sheets of rose gold. The lights of the Xenobiology Institute were coming on, silver bubbles glowing against the darkening red sky, and the steady blinking red of soft-glowing fungi, obscured by the perimeter fence. The orbital denial batteries, so silent and strong, made so by human hands. The stars unfolded above them, cold and dark, overflowing with golden ships unseen. But the human did not fear that sight, despite having every reason to. He flung the umbrella over his shoulder, and it looked like an instrument of war in its own right. Now, his boots squelched in the wet gravel as he turned towards the lab complex. Let's see what else we can fit into my jacket. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.